All right, welcome to Waking the Kraken. This is a special episode this week. This is our first Captain's Log.
Yeah, which is going to be something we're going to be adding on. We're going to do about once a month, where we're just, instead of doing the normal like news and just kind of like back and forth about what's been going on, we're going to be doing more of kind of a focused episode where we're talking about a specific topic.
Yeah, and generally it's going to be things that we like personally, so you get to know us a little bit better. And stuff,
yeah, so that way it's not just us talking about how things are all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so this week we're going to do top 3 favorite books.
Yes.
Books. Did you do you have yours ready?
I do. I have. Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead and start with one of yours, or do you
Absolutely. Yeah. I've got this book right here, which is by Albert Camus. It's The Stranger, and I actually stumbled upon this book wonderfully. I had a little bit of extra change in my pocket, and I went to Barnes & Noble, and I was just looking around the books. I didn't really know what I wanted to get. And I stumbled upon this, and I thought it looked rather peculiar. So I just bought it. It was like $5. It was on sale. I didn't know anything about it, and so I had heard the name Albert Camus before. And so I decided to read it, and I just started getting into it. And the thing that I liked about it the most, the reason I think I was this attracted to this book, was it's very dense and heavy on like existentialism.
Yeah.
But also, seeing how I didn't have any preconceived notion, no one had told me to read it, no one had said anything to me about it, I found it exhilarating, like whenever you watch them for the first time.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have any conceived notion about a movie, no one told you like any spoilers, would be like, hey, I think you'd really like this. I think it would be something that you would enjoy. It's about a man who is faced with the fact that he lives in, he lives in Algeria. I think it's Tangiers, but it might be wrong.
Okay.
But it's a French colony at the turn of the century. And his mother's just died. And so it's this kind of existential crisis that he's having while living in French-controlled Algeria.
Right.
And so I loved every bit. It's very descriptive on like the beaches and these little like house and like this little apartment that he lives in and stuff. And it's gorgeous. You learn a lot about what's going on around him and everything.
Yeah.
You learn about the culture that was going on. And I think it was a good little vignette of a little book to read and stuff like that if you want to be transported somewhere else.
Interesting. And so like, when you say like existentialism, define that.
Okay, so it basically deals with a lot of internal things that are going on with him, like what he believes is the world around him. It's a philosophy set that he believes and stuff like that. And so you're learning a lot about like these crises of like that are going on because he's never really realized what it would be like without his mother.
Right. Okay.
So
interesting. And it's by Albert Camus.
Albert Camus.
And he's known for being a philosopher already, isn't he?
Kind of, yeah. He's one of those like kind of like I don't want to say lost generation because I don't know if he falls completely in that category, but he's very similar to a lot of those writers from the lost generation.
Okay.
So,
well, right on.
What about you? What do you got on slate for the first one?
Well, for my first one, I've got this book called Silence by John Cage. This is a little bit, I don't know, it's quite a bit different.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically, John Cage is a 20th century composer. He was one of the kind of like founding fathers of what we call minimalism today.
Okay.
And he was one of the like kind of originators on like indeterminate music, which is like music where like the score is written out, but the directions in the score make it to where the music is going to sound different every time it's performed.
Okay.
And so like that was kind of one of his big things that he always worked on was indeterminacy. And I really like this book a lot. It's essentially just a collection of different lectures that he's given over the years. Mm-hmm. But like his whole thing was like he would treat his lectures the same way he would treat his music. So like, for instance, it wouldn't be uncommon for him. He has a piece of music for amplified cactus.
Okay.
Where you actually hook up, like a pickup to a cactus and you like scratch it with things and a bow and whatever and make these noises that it can only be made that way.
Okay.
I mean, it's not something you necessarily jam in the car, but so he tries to take these weird ideas of indeterminacy and then translate that into the actual delivering of his lecture.
Okay.
So when you open up the book, almost everything is going to be written out in like weird formats. So like sometimes there'll be a direction that says for each line allow for 1 second of time to pass for the reading.
Gotcha.
And it'll be like divided into columns. So you know that you just got a short, like 1, 2 Mississippi as you're going down it.
Okay.
And so like if you're just kind of thinking about the pace, then you understand that this is the tempo he's saying it at. And then you'll randomly just get to an area where it could even be mid-sentence where there's no words. And then the column just keeps going and it's blank, but there's no words.
So what you're telling me is like each line is about like a second of a blurb?
About a second of time, yeah.
So like basically it'd be like if we had a prompt right here and you were just reading it kind of thing and stuff like that. Pause at the moment so you're not seeing it. That's really cool.
Yeah, so basically as you're getting to these blanks, you still have to go through it line by line per second, but there's nothing going on.
Right.
And that's to make you feel like you're seeing the performance of him actually giving the speech, which is him actually taking a set amount of silence, like between his lecture. Like he's actually thinking about how much time he wants to go into each line, and then at what point he needs to stop talking and allow for silence to happen.
Yeah.
And the whole time this is going on, he's trying to explain to you how indeterminate music works while it's actually happening to the lecture he's giving you.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and so this book is kind of like a visualization of that through text, and it starts with something as simple as that and goes like way off into like a little bit more kind of weird stuff, like where he'll just like pick random words and put them together, and every once in a while you'll get like a coherent sentence.
Huh.
And things like that. But it's a really interesting book, and I think it offers a lot of insight into some of the edges of what music are doing right now with like the new horizons, so to speak. Yeah, it was a very influential book on me.
Yeah,
musically.
no, I mean, like I've heard you talk about this guy before. You've even shown me some of his music and stuff like that before.
Yeah, he's a really interesting dude. You should definitely check him out.
Yeah.
What you got next?
My second book that I have is called. It was one that I read in college.
Okay.
From a history major. It's called Empire Workshop: Latin America and the United States and the Rise of New Imperialism by Greg Grandin. This book I thought was really interesting if you want to understand the state of current affairs.
Yeah.
This book takes place in. It basically analyzes a lot of the ideas of where counterterrorism, like our methods that we use for counterterrorism in the 21st century, especially on the war on terror, come from.
Okay.
And it talks mainly about like all of the revolutions that were going on in the 80s or the 70s and 80s in Latin America. Mm-hmm. And he analyzes what tactics we learned by fighting like communist rebels and stuff in Latin America and like regime buildings and stuff like that for us. And where the default on how now we're faced with using 70s and 80s Cold War tactics against extremists who are not connected to a political affiliation. I find it really interesting because politics can become one of those things where eventually, if it's not accelerating anymore and stuff like that, people will lose interest in particular extreme versions of politics or anything like that. Like if you're a rebel and you're fighting for a communist like kind of state and everything like that, and you keep getting demoralized, people are going to start walking away. They're going to abandon the cause. And that's something that the Americans started to do in the 70s and 80s in this book. But now we're fighting an enemy that is an ideological enemy and a religious enemy, one that has its promise of store up things in heaven kind of thing. And so it's really hard to use tactics where you can break people in their habits because you're using the tactics that you use against a political insurgency against a religious insurgency.
Okay. That's really interesting. And so this book basically just kind of delves into this.
Yeah, he's a bit of like it was weird that we kind of read it for history because a lot of times in history you want to give about like 30 years between what goes on so that you can actually study it and go, this is what the outcome is. So he starts to jump into things that are going on in the war on terror now. But I think at the moment, and it could possibly change, he might do another like edition later on where he's revised things. But for right now, if you want to understand the current state of affairs, especially with all of our wars in the Middle East, and why these people do what they do and how the torture that we do against them, the waterboarding and everything like that we've been seeing at Guantanamo Bay and other things, is not really working very well, and we need to reevaluate our strategy.
Exactly. Okay, that's really interesting. And who's this by again?
This is by Greg Grandy.
Greg Grandy.
Yeah, or Grandin. Greg Grandin.
Grandin.
Yeah.
What's
and
it?
he's very interesting.
Empire's Workshop.
Empire's Workshop.
Right on.
He also, actually, I've read another book by him. He has Fordlandia, which you might have saw on the cover kind of thing. And that's actually a really interesting one, too. But I'll dive into that another time.
Right.
So,
All right, for my next choice, I've got Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock.
and this is one we've discussed on the program before.
Yeah, so Graham Hancock is somebody that I've been really interested in for a while. He just kind of takes like a investigative journalist approach to archaeology. Basically, the overall thesis of this book is that he's arguing for evidence suggesting a civilization centered in Antarctica, like way before a lot of the ancient civilizations, and during some of the ancient civilizations we were aware of that like just hasn't been recognized before.
Okay.
And the whole thing kind of hinges on an idea of about 10,500 years ago. A polar shift happened where the poles moved. Mm-hmm. And so when that happened, Antarctica then became frozen.
Right.
And then so geologically everything just had to shift climate-wise.
Okay.
And so there was a civilization that existed on the continent Antarctica before it was frozen over. At least that's what he's saying.
Okay.
And he uses a bunch of different things ranging from like actual geological evidence where they go to like places like Tiwanaku in Bolivia, and he was actually there on part of the what's the excavation of that and the exploration of it, and so he talks about a bunch of different just little things that they actually find that just kind of help confirm the existence of this with like this evidence is literally like picked up in like a bunch of different ancient civilizations. Man, I can't word.
Oh, you're fine.
But basically, like, there's evidence of there being this civilization from everywhere to ancient Egypt, the Olmecs, Aztecs, and even Mayan.
So he's
ruins.
suggesting a connected civilization kind of idea?
Well, he's saying, well, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely that. Like, definitely that they were all communicating together at one point in time.
Right.
And traveling to each other. But he's just saying this whole, like, potentially what people might even consider Atlantis, which is, potentially what they're talking about.
Right.
Which I don't think is quite right. And he doesn't even argue for that, but that's just an interesting point. But yeah, and he also uses a bunch of different cultural and mythological similarities between all of those cultures as well. Like their god stories and different gods that are like all from a seemingly similar kind of culture.
Right, like creation myths and like...
Yeah, where it's almost like they're finding within like the Aztec and the Mayan and the ancient Egyptians that they're getting these gods that are like all identical, but like completely not like anything else that they've had. Like they've adopted them from another culture, and like it seems like this god has been adapted from the same culture across different cultures.
Okay, interesting.
And so he's using that as evidence for this mysterious culture that lived in Antarctica. So it's a really interesting book, and it offers up a chance for human society to be, about 10,000 years older than we give it credit for.
True.
Which is amazing.
Yeah. All right, so for my last book, I have one that I've been working on with not only, like, obviously I'll show it on this show, but we've been working on it with What's Haunting Wes and Nate. If you know anything about me, I love, like, The Conjuring. I love things with Ed and Lorraine in them. If you've listened to What's Haunting Wes and Nate and stuff like that, we still want to meet Lorraine Warren really bad.
Right.
She's still alive. And so the book that I have right now is one of a series of different collections of Ed and Lorraine stories.
Yeah.
But this is the first book in it. This is the Demonologist. As you can see, it's been worn really big. I've been wearing it out a lot because I've read it multiple times now. But these are a vignette of different kind of case studies.
Yeah.
So it has the Annabelle story in it. It has the Amityville Horror is mentioned in it quite a bit also. The witch house that you see in the first Conjuring is in it. The Einfield haunting that you see in The Conjuring 2 is in it. Lots of other stories are in it too. I'm not necessarily sure if I believe everything. Obviously, I didn't experience this, so I can kind of have that relative distance. Right. Ed and Lorraine Warren are demonologists who study demons and these kind of things with that. Their story is very well done. It's written very well. It's not by Ed and Lorraine Warren. It's actually by Gerald Brittle.
Gerald Brittle?
Yeah, I believe that's how you pronounce his last name. But he basically interviewed them.
Okay.
And wrote down everything that they told him this. In fact, you actually get the origin story of how Ed and Lorraine Warren met each other in it, which is quite adorable.
That's funny.
Actually, it's a really beautiful little story about how Ed liked to paint houses. Like he was a painter,
right?
And so he would paint houses, but he would always find himself attracted to painting haunted houses.
Of course.
And then Lorraine and him met, and she has empathy kind of thing and stuff like that. She's an empath. Mm-hmm. She sees things and stuff and can communicate with this. And so they kind of just found each other naturally, kind of thing. And
wow.
It's a really interesting. If it wasn't based on real people, it would still be a beautiful little story about two ghost hunters and everything like that. And it's terrifying. I have read this in the middle of the night sometimes and wound up having to stay up because I couldn't sleep. Some of the things that they write about this, some of the demons and stuff like that they write about it are horrifying.
That's exciting. I'm very familiar with Ed and Lorraine Warren, and I've never actually got a chance to go through this book myself. But this is one I've known that I've heard you talk about it for years.
Right.
Yeah, so that's exciting. It's a good book. I imagine it's a really good book.
It's great if you want like something spooky, maybe around the holidays, or if you're just like me and Halloween's every year because you wear death on your shirt.
Yeah, right.
You can enjoy it at any time.
Anytime. All right. Well, I got one more, but this one I don't actually have on me because I only ever had it as an audiobook.
Right.
But I don't want to forget the author's name. I always forget the author's name. But it's the book Forever War by Joe Haldeman.
Right.
So, basically the story goes, William Mandela is a physics student, and he's extremely smart.
Right.
He gets conscripted into a war between humans and what are the alien species called the Taurans. And basically, due to his extremely high IQ, he gets placed in this crazy elite task force that trains in space on a planet beyond Pluto.
Okay.
Which is really interesting because the planet in the book is called Karen, like River Styx. Mm-hmm. But the book was written before Pluto was even discovered.
Okay.
And Karen is the name of the moon on around Pluto.
Right.
Which is weird that so before we even were aware of Pluto, this guy came up with a name for a planet that ended up becoming the moon of Pluto.
Do you think the scientist really liked this book and so he named one of the planets?
He must have. But basically, they do all this training, and a lot of the trainees end up dying because they're using live ammunition, and it's extreme conditions on this other planet at the edge of the solar system. And obviously, this is a future, a sci-fi.
Right.
It's a military sci-fi, if you could say. But basically, what makes this book cool is this war that's going on between these people, and the character and his involvement in the war is this third-person kind of experience of being a soldier in this kind of task force that they basically travel for thousands of light years with these things called collapsers, and they're basically machine wormhole gates that we place in space. But traveling to and from them causes so much time dilation that what might be a 2-year excursion for going out to fight the Taurans and then to come back to Earth, for the soldiers, 27 years will pass. But
they've only aged 2 years.
Yeah, so all the Martians, all of the people who go to the war in space, they are only aging 2 years of their own time. But the dilation of what goes on Earth, because they've traveled near the speed of light,
right,
to get there, is basically translated, and they come back to the Earth 27 years older.
Is it similar, in concept of what we saw in Interstellar?
Exactly.
Where people that go onto the planet don't age, but then they come back, and that guy's way older and stuff like that.
It's a very similar concept.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. It actually has a lot to do with just how the closer and closer you get to the speed of light, mm-hmm. the slower and slower your passage of time is.
Okay.
Which is a really weird concept, but this book explores it, and it's one of the main things. In fact, it's the main plot device, which is why this is one of my favorite books. So what makes this book so interesting is it's not really about the wars. This William Mandela guy, he ends up falling in love with this other woman who's got a super high IQ in the force with him. And whenever they go off, like I said, they come back from their first war, and they're kind of in love with each other.
Right.
At this point. And it's been 27 years, and they're just waiting to go on to the next one. But that's just, that whole first one was basically just to set up the whole first campaign and what the war is like, and then the fact that the time dilation is so huge because they go off to battle and come back, and you're just kind of hit with it like they are.
Right.
And then they go off for another battle. And this is where things get really interesting because there's so much time dilation going on. Whenever these battles happen, you don't know whether or not the Tauran ship that you're getting ready to go have a battle with is coming from your present, your past, or your future. Because the time dilation lead up is so different.
Right.
So you might be flying in and they have this thing called future shock where they show up to this second battle and the Taurans are like 50 years ahead of them technologically, and all of a sudden they have all of these things that completely destroy and are designed to outwit their ship's technology. And it just makes for this like crazy weird like kind of war experience where like it's terrifying. Like you wouldn't even know, like you could either show up and they're so like inferior to you that you just wipe through them, or they're so or they'll just do that to you.
Yeah.
Or you'll get a fair battle.
It sounds really like an exciting book. Like, all the way through.
Yeah.
Like.
And then like I'm just saying all this setup because like what's weird is they come back from future shock, and society as a form of like population control has made it illegal to be heterosexual.
Okay.
And so they then are no longer soldiers, but they then are to like hide their relationship with each other because they would be like sent to prison for being known as
is it for like overpopulation reasons?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And so this kind of thing happens over and over, and they keep trying to adapt to the way society is, and like it's really about these people just trying to adapt to going back to a place and it being 100 years in the future and everything being different, and then you still being the same person you were the last time you were there. And it's just a really human book that like takes all of these crazy outlandish concepts and just wraps them all up in this really neat package. And I only gave you like the gist of the like, I would say the first beginning of the book that really makes it compelling, like just kind of sets the stage.
Right.
I highly recommend it.
I mean, we do want you to read all of these books.
Yeah. It's Forever War, again, by Joe Haldeman. It's probably one of my favorite like book stories of all time I've ever read.
Do you have any honorable mentions or anything like that? Or
Oh, yeah. So a lot of people grew up with like Harry Potter, like I'm sure we both did.
Yeah, I read Harry Potter as a kid.
Yeah, and there was also some other stuff that was coming out at the time that I was really into. And one in particular is by Susan Collins, who wrote the Hunger Games series.
Okay.
This is I think it's 5 books. It's like a 5-book series that she had written before any of the Hunger Games books, called Gregor the Overland. So that's what the first one looks like, and like I'll just kind of show you up on this camera that like I've got all of these. I think this is the 3rd, 4th, and 5th one. I don't have the second one for some reason. It's gone. I can't find it.
You might have lent it to someone.
Yeah, I've looked all over for it and haven't been able to find it. Now these are really different because these are like super like relaxed reads. These are young adult novels. Like it's like you could read that book, which is about 200 pages, in probably a day or 2.
Yeah.
Like and it's like not super difficult to read, but the story's just really interesting. It's about this kid going into the earth and finding a civilization, and him being like a prophesied hero.
Yeah.
It's really compelling, and like there's all sorts of like talking animals and like a subterranean species of humans and like giant bats that talk and things like that. It's crazy, but it was just a really fun book for me, and I just really enjoyed like the whole series growing up. Yeah. And I think it's something that everyone should try and check out, because I thought it was way cooler than the Hunger Games person.
I also have an honorable mention, but I don't have it because I have two copies of this book, one in an actual book form and one in a graphic novel form. However, I have lent both of them out.
No.
It's The King in Yellow.
Oh, yeah,
You hear me talk about it all the time. You heard me talk about it all the time. It's becoming more and more popular because of things like True Detective and other things like that. But it's a book that was written in the late 1800s. I think it was 1885. And basically, it's 7 small stories about a made-up play called The King in Yellow.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that The King in Yellow has in connecting to all of these 7 stories is The King in Yellow makes people go insane. Like, you read the book, you read the play, you can't stop reading the play. You start learning about Carcosa and the Black Sun and the Yellow Throne and the King in Yellow.
Yeah.
And you start to slowly drive yourself into insanity.
Yeah.
I believe the graphic novel only has 5 of the 7 stories that they drew out.
Right.
it's a very quick read. I think I purchased it off Amazon for like $5.
That's a good price.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal price for it. It's duty free, so you can find it almost anywhere. Or not duty free, I mean royalty free, so you can find it anywhere.
That's amazing.
But it's by, I think it's Arthur Chambers.
Arthur Chambers.
And it is basically, if you like things like Lovecraft or anything that's like kind of in the horror genre and stuff like that, Lovecraft was very influenced by this guy, allegedly, from what I've heard. Him and Arthur Machen, who also wrote, there's another book that I had a lot of his stories, like The White People and other collections.
Okay. Yeah.
But Chambers was brilliant in this. Like, I think the first book in the series actually really makes me excited, because he wrote this in 1885, and he's basically talking about a war between the United States and Germany ending. And he predicts that it should take place around, like, I think it's 1919.
Okay.
Which is eerie, because if you now in the future know about anything and stuff like that, you know that's the exact time that World War I ended around.
That's true. Yeah.
And so he predicted a war with Germany that's mechanized and having a lot of like PTSD and everything like that 20, 30 years before it even ever happened.
That's wild. Dude, it is crazy how some like artists can just like come up with like these kind of ideas, and then they come into fruition.
Absolutely. It's almost creepy on the idea that you go, was this guy... One of them is about the storming of the Bastille in France and everything like that. I'm not going to try to reveal too much more. Find it in either the book form or the graphic novel, which I picked up, I think, at Barnes & Noble for like $20. The graphic novel is gorgeous by itself and stuff like that. And so
usually cool stuff like that in graphic novel hands get some of the best artists.
Sure, yeah.
I always feel like they do.
But that's my picks right now.
Well, right on.
So
well, that's some of our favorite books.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. We hope you liked our one-off, our first Captain's Log.
Yeah.
So join us next week when we go back to our normal format.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again.
Have a good one.
Okay, goodbye.